When Tyler Robinson walked into his preliminary hearing, his defense team expected a routine procedural update, but day one completely shattered their strategy. Prosecutors immediately shifted the case by unsealing high-resolution surveillance tracking that mapped the suspect's exact movements across the university campus. If Robinson was completely detached from the incident, as his defense claimed, why did state evidence place him directly on the physical path leading to the high-profile target? Today, we are breaking down the exact courtroom evidence from Provo, Utah that established probable cause and permanently sealed his path toward a full capital murder trial. Subscribe to U.S. Crime Cases if you want to follow the absolute truth behind the evidence. We just hit 10,000 subscribers. I'm honestly blown away. To my day ones and everyone just joining the U.S. Crime Cases family, thank you for riding with me. Your support keeps this investigation going. Let's get right back into this tense courtroom timeline. Right, so picture this. Inside the 4th District Court in Provo, Utah, the atmosphere was just incredibly heavy. You have to understand what it actually felt like in that room on that specific morning. Usually when you go into these preliminary hearings before a judge, in this case Judge Tony Graff, it is really just to determine whether the state has enough basic baseline evidence to move the whole process forward. It is often a lot of paperwork, scheduling, administrative delays, and procedural stuff. I see it all the time in these courtrooms. But instead of playing it slow and strictly by the book, the prosecution took a completely aggressive stance right out of the gate. They bypassed all those standard administrative delays and went straight to the absolute core of their case. They presented a timeline that fundamentally changed the trajectory of this entire legal battle. It wasn't just a room full of lawyers going through the motions. The gallery was absolutely packed, and the emotional weight of what happened was right there, sitting in the front row. We have to remember that at the very center of this complex legal debate, a family lost someone they loved deeply. Conservative activist Charlie Kirk was fatally shot, and his widow Erica, along with his mother, were sitting right there in the courtroom. Imagine having to relive the absolute worst day of your life in public, surrounded by cameras and reporters. When you are watching a trial like this unfold, it is so easy to get caught up in the legal moves and the forensic science, but the reality is that a human life was violently taken. The family was there searching for answers. They wanted the truth, and the state was determined to lay it out for them. To do that, the state unveiled a massive compilation of campus surveillance video. I mean, they pulled everything they could find. This footage, according to investigators, tracked Tyler Robinson's exact movements across the Utah Valley University campus on the very day the shooting occurred. The prosecution called former State Bureau of Investigation agent Hull to the stand to walk the judge and the gallery through it. Hull's job was to map out what prosecutors called a timeline gap. According to the state's presentation, this surveillance footage did not just show a typical college student casually walking to class or hanging out on the quad. Instead, police said it established a highly calculated, deliberate physical path. Police said the cameras captured a route that led directly toward the Losey Center. If you are not familiar with the geography of the UVU campus, the Losey Center is the specific building where the single fatal bullet was fired from a high rooftop position. The prosecution used this compiled video to slowly, meticulously build a visual bridge between the suspect's known locations earlier in the day and the exact spot where the shooter lay in wait. The impact of this visual evidence hitting the courtroom monitors was immediate. You could feel the air just completely leave the room. The state asked the judge to play an enhanced version of the video for the court. Police said this footage showed a figure actively running across the flat surface of the UVU roof before suddenly dropping down to a crawl right near the edge of the building. Authorities said the figure was taking up what they officially described in their reports as a sniper's perch pressed into the roof's gravel. Watching this play out was brutal for everyone involved. As the video played on the screens, observers noted the heavy emotional weight settling over the room. The victim's widow and mother were reacting visibly in the gallery. They were holding on to each other, forced to watch the final calculated physical movements leading up to the tragedy. You look at that and think, wow, the human resilience it takes to just sit there and watch, that is staggering. The state made sure the court saw not just the mechanics of the crime, but the deliberate nature of it. They wanted to prove to the judge that this wasn't some random accident. It was a carefully planned approach. But the defense team, led by attorney Michael Burt, did not just sit back and let this narrative take hold. They did not back down for a single second. Burt stood up and launched a fierce, relentless cross-examination of the state agents on the stand. The defense's strategy became crystal clear almost instantly: attack the visual identification with everything they had. Burt pointed out a massive flaw in the state's absolute certainty. He noted to the court that the figure up on that rooftop in the video was completely obscured. The person was wearing hats, masks, and sunglasses. He argued to the judge that the state was relying entirely on silhouette assumptions rather than undeniable, clear-face facial identification. Burt pressed the issue hard. He kept asking Agent Hull and the other investigators how law enforcement could definitively, 100% put Tyler Robinson on that specific roof when the camera angles could not confirm a human face. The defense was basically telling the court, you have a guy in a mask on a roof, and you have my client on campus, but you cannot legally prove they are the exact same person just by looking at a grainy, enhanced screen. If you really think about it, the defense was asking a very valid legal question. Let's talk about the blind spots that Burt brought up during his cross-examination. Imagine you are sitting in that courtroom, listening to a state agent explain how a person moves through a crowded university. You have thousands of students, staff, and visitors milling around because of the massive political event happening that day. Police said the cameras caught a figure moving against the grain. But Burt asked Agent Hull directly if there were blind spots in the campus camera network. The court heard that, yes, there were significant gaps where the cameras didn't catch anyone for several minutes. Burt pointed out that if there is a window of time where the suspect is completely off camera, how can the police definitively say the masked person who emerges on the other side of the building and climbs the stairs is the exact same individual? The defense argued that in a crowd of thousands of people, assuming a silhouette belongs to one specific 23-year-old student is a massive leap of logic that doesn't belong in a capital murder case. And you have to look at how the court handled this. Justice said that at this preliminary stage, the rules are very specific. Judge Graff is not there to decide if Tyler Robinson is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. He is only there to determine probable cause. Probable cause just means looking at the evidence and deciding if it is reasonably likely that the defendant committed the crime. The defense knew this, which is why they fought so incredibly hard to introduce reasonable doubt right on day one. They wanted to show the judge that the state's foundation was built on blurry shapes and assumptions, not hard facts. But the prosecution pushed back just as hard. They argued that you don't look at the rooftop video in isolation. You look at the whole picture. Police said they tracked the movement, they tracked the clothes, they tracked the timeline. They argued that the sheer volume of connecting points created a mountain of probable cause that could not be ignored just because the shooter decided to wear a mask. We really have to center the human experience in all of this legal back and forth. Every time the prosecution showed a map, the defense pointed out a shadow. Every time the police said suspect, the defense said unidentified figure. And right in the middle of this intense, high-stakes tug of war sat Charlie Kirk's family. They had to listen to attorneys debate the identity of a person crawling on a roof, knowing that the person on that screen ended their loved one's life. It is a heartbreaking reality of the justice system. You have these sterile, procedural arguments happening over the most traumatic event a family can ever experience. This created a massive, high-stakes legal debate right on the courtroom floor. It wasn't just about whether the video was shocking to watch. It was about the strict legal threshold of putting a man on trial for his life. Is an enhanced video showing a masked figure dropping to a crawl enough to legally establish identity and move forward with a capital case? Or did the prosecution take a massive risk on day one by relying on heavily obscured imagery, hoping the judge would see what they saw? Right. I see exactly why the defense took the angle they did, and I see exactly why the prosecution swung so hard right out of the gate. When you are dealing with a capital murder charge, every single second of video, every single camera blind spot, and every single shadow matters. Day one was supposed to be simple. Instead, it laid down a highly contested, incredibly emotional foundation that will dictate every single move both sides make as this trial moves forward. The courtroom debate then shifted backward in the timeline, moving away from the chaotic moments on the roof and focusing intensely on the hours before the incident actually occurred. This is where the story takes a really unsettling turn, because it moves from the mechanics of a crime to the terrifyingly normal moments that preceded it. Law enforcement agents took the stand and presented heavily documented testimony detailing Tyler Robinson's interactions on the UVU campus earlier that day. Investigators told the court that Robinson was seen doing what any normal college student would be doing, eating at a campus Chick-fil-A. Wow. When you hear something like that in a courtroom, it just stops you in your tracks. I mean, Charlie Kirk's family had to sit there and listen to how ordinary the suspect's morning was. While they were going about their day, completely unaware that their lives were about to be shattered forever, the person accused of tearing their family apart was just sitting in a fast food restaurant. It adds such a heavy, devastating layer to the human experience of this tragedy. You just can't help but feel a deep ache for the family having to process that level of casual normalcy right before the violence. Right. So after establishing that early morning normalcy, the state started tightening the timeline. Investigators told the judge that Robinson was recorded casually walking among the arriving crowd as thousands of people gathered for the Turning Point USA event. Imagine the sheer volume of people on that campus. You have students, political supporters, security personnel, and locals all packed into this one area. And right in the middle of all that excited energy, police testified about witness accounts that placed the suspect near the event perimeter just before Kirk took the stage to address the crowd. The prosecution used this specific timeline to argue a critical, foundational point to the judge. This was not a random occurrence. By placing the suspect at the venue hours early, watching him navigate the massive crowd, and tracing a deliberate path to a high vantage point, the state built a narrative of a calculated, politically motivated stalking event. Prosecutors said he wasn't just a student walking to class who happened to get caught up in a chaotic situation. They argued he was hunting, but the defense immediately pushed back on this narrative. Michael Burt and his team argued that merely being on a college campus where you are enrolled as a student is not a crime. They pointed out that thousands of other people were navigating that exact same crowd, standing near that exact same perimeter. The defense asked the court to consider if it is fair to label a student walking through his own university as stalking, just because a high-profile event happened to be taking place on the grounds that day. I see exactly what the defense was trying to do here. They were fighting desperately to keep the narrative grounded in coincidence rather than calculated malice, trying to humanize their client against the state's heavy allegations. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now to follow this case closely and join our community as we uncover the truth together daily. Continuing with how the state built their case, the physical tracking across the campus was really only the foundation. Establishing the suspect's path on day one was a strategic setup for the hard forensic evidence that followed. You could physically feel the tension in the room shift when the prosecution moved from the video screens to the physical evidence bags. The court heard highly detailed testimony regarding the recovery of the weapon used in the shooting. Police said they located a Mauser 30-06 bolt-action rifle wrapped up in a towel near the scene. When you hear the description of the weapon, the reality of the violence really sets in. This wasn't a spontaneous altercation. A bolt-action rifle is a serious piece of equipment. Crime lab technicians logged DNA tests from the weapon, and state experts testified under oath that the swabs taken from the rifle matched both the defendant and his roommate. Now, this is where the legal chess match got incredibly intense. The prosecution presented the DNA as a slam dunk. They told the court, here is the weapon and here is Tyler Robinson's DNA right on it. But the defense zeroed in on the fact that the roommate's DNA was also present on that exact same rifle. Burt argued that DNA transfer is a very real scientifically proven phenomenon, especially in a shared living environment. If two guys live in the same dorm or apartment, they share towels, they touch the same surfaces, their laundry gets mixed up. The defense argued that finding Robinson's DNA on a towel or a rifle inside his own residence or linked to his roommate does not automatically mean he pulled the trigger on that roof. They planted that seed of reasonable doubt right there, suggesting the forensic evidence was far messier than the state wanted to admit. However, this forensic link was exactly the anchor the prosecution needed to introduce their digital and testimonial evidence. With the physical path established through the surveillance videos and the DNA logged in the official crime lab reports, the state brought forward the police interview with Robinson's roommate, Lance Twiggs. This was a massive blow in the courtroom. According to court records, the roommate told investigators that Robinson had stated he wishes he hadn't done it. Just let those words sink in for a second. In the context of a capital murder hearing, a statement like that carries an immense, suffocating weight. You have a family sitting a few feet away, grieving an unimaginable loss, and they have to hear that the suspect allegedly showed remorse behind closed doors to a roommate. It is a very raw, very painful piece of the puzzle. Furthermore, authorities did not just stop at the roommate's verbal testimony. They backed it up with a digital footprint. Police entered digital logs into evidence, highlighting a specific post in a Discord chat room. According to investigators, the suspect allegedly wrote, "It was me at UVU yesterday," in this online forum shortly after the incident. When you put all of these pieces together, you can completely see the prosecution's strategy unfolding. By tying the campus surveillance video directly to the physical recovery of the rifle, connecting the DNA to his living situation, and then dropping the subsequent digital confessions on top of it all, the state executed a highly coordinated legal maneuver. They used day one to systematically box the defense out of their initial wrong place, wrong time narrative. It is incredibly difficult to argue that your client was just a normal student caught in the background when the police are presenting a digital log of him allegedly claiming responsibility for being there. The gravity of this situation cannot be overstated. You have the defense fighting tooth and nail to remind the court that confessions can be taken out of context, that digital logs can be misunderstood, and that shared living spaces contaminate DNA evidence. They are doing exactly what they are supposed to do, forcing the state to prove every single inch of their allegations. But on the other side, you have prosecutors meticulously weaving a web that connects a chicken sandwich in the morning to a sniper's perch in the afternoon. And caught in the crossfire of all these legal arguments are the victims, the people who actually have to live with the permanent consequences of what happened that day at Utah Valley University, right? So picking up exactly where we left off, if we truly want to understand why day one changed absolutely everything in this courtroom, it is incredibly important to first understand the specific legal threshold of a preliminary hearing under Utah law. You know, when we watch these high-profile true crime cases on television or follow them online, it is so easy to assume that every time a judge bangs a gavel, a final verdict is coming. But that is not what was happening here. Judge Tony Graff was not sitting on the bench in Provo that morning to determine final guilt or innocence. He wasn't there to hand down a sentence to Tyler Robinson. I see a lot of confusion about this in the public discussion, but his job on day one was strictly gatekeeping. His role was strictly to decide if the state's evidence met the baseline standard of probable cause required to advance a death penalty eligible capital murder trial. Wow. Just think about the sheer weight of that for a second. We are talking about the ultimate penalty. The state is formally asking the court to put a 23-year-old on trial for his life, while a grieving family sits just a few feet away in the front row, desperately needing justice and answers for a life that was already violently taken. The gravity inside that room, you could have heard a pin drop. Probable cause is a much, much lower bar than proving something beyond a reasonable doubt. Police said they had more than enough evidence to easily clear that initial hurdle, but the defense team walked in knowing that if they could somehow kill the state's momentum right here on day one, they could potentially save their client's life before a jury was even seated. But then the unsealing of that campus tracking video completely altered the legal landscape. It was a massive, devastating blow to the defense's strategy. Because of that lower standard of proof at a preliminary hearing, the state did not need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the masked figure crawling on the roof was Tyler Robinson. They didn't need a high-definition close-up of his face on day one, and court said the prosecution only needed to show that a reasonable person could look at the physical path mapped out on the video, look at the DNA that police said was on the rifle, read the digital chat logs, and logically conclude that a crime was likely committed by the defendant. The defense fought incredibly hard against this visual evidence. I mean, they really went down swinging. Attorney Michael Burt and his team argued passionately that relying on a masked silhouette is a terrifying and dangerous precedent to set in a capital case. They pleaded with the judge to see the gaps, but the sheer volume of connecting points presented by the state just overwhelmed them. When you go from a student eating a normal breakfast at Chick-fil-A to tracking his specific movements through a massive crowd of thousands to watching a figure do a tactical rooftop crawl, and then police said they recovered a Mauser 30-06 bolt-action rifle directly tied to him. It created an absolute mountain of probable cause. It completely boxed in the defense. They walked into that courthouse expecting a simple procedural day, and they walked out having to defend against a highly coordinated, minute-by-minute timeline that placed their client right at the exact center of a national tragedy. You can completely understand why this case has sparked such intense public debate across the country. People are arguing about this everywhere, in legal circles and living rooms alike. And honestly, we really want to know where you stand based strictly on the verified facts presented in court. We are looking at this case together, like friends analyzing a complex puzzle, and I want to hear your thoughts on a few specific pieces of this legal chess match. First, let's talk about that visual surveillance evidence. The defense argued fiercely that the masked rooftop figure cannot be definitively identified as Tyler Robinson from a video screen alone. If you can't see a face, how can you know for sure? They make a valid point about assumptions. But on the flip side, the prosecution has that continuous physical path meticulously mapped out, leading right to the snipe perch. So, do you believe the campus tracking timeline, combined with the DNA that police said was found on the rifle, is enough to establish absolute probable cause for a capital trial? Is circumstantial mapping enough to confidently put a man on trial for his life? Or does the state need something much more concrete before moving forward? Second, building right off of that first point, the defense strongly challenged the state's reliance on that enhanced zoomed-in video of the masked rooftop figure. They argued to the judge that altering or enhancing footage leaves way too much room for human assumption. I see exactly where they're coming from. When you enhance dark or grainy footage, your brain sometimes fills in the blanks with what it expects to see. So, how heavily should a judge weigh visual identity arguments during a preliminary hearing compared to a full jury trial? If the court said it is good enough for a bind-over now, does that give the prosecution an unfair advantage when they finally get in front of a real jury who might just assume the video is unshakable scientific proof? Third, we have to talk about the massive media circus surrounding this entire event. Because of the high-profile nature of Charlie Kirk as the victim and the heavy, constant courtroom presence of national media outlets, Day one drew immense, overwhelming public focus. Everyone is talking about it. The victim's family has to grieve on a national stage, and the suspect is being judged in the court of public opinion before he even enters a plea. With prosecutors officially pursuing the death penalty, does the public release of this explosive day one video evidence ensure a fair trial through absolute transparency? Or does the intense national media coverage risk completely contaminating a future jury pool? If everyone in the state has already seen the video on the news and heard that police said the DNA is a match, how do you possibly find 12 impartial people who haven't already made up their minds? Right. And finally, let's look at how high-stakes crimes are actually solved and prosecuted today. Day 1 successfully anchored the physical crime scene to the forensic recovery of the rifle and the footprints that police said were left in the gravel, but it also leaned heavily on digital Discord logs and alleged roommate confessions. In modern high-stakes trials like this one is a massive victory on day 1 determined more by the physical, tangible evidence found at the actual scene or the digital timeline built by investigators long after the fact. What holds more weight in a courtroom in this era? A physical footprint left on a roof or a digital footprint left in an online chat room? Look, Day 1 completely rewrote the entire trajectory of this assassination case. The evidence unsealed in that Provo courtroom has left the nation completely stunned, and the family of the victim is still enduring the unimaginable pain of seeking closure for their loved one. They are living a nightmare while the legal system slowly grinds forward. Where does the defense go from here before final closing arguments happen on September 1? Drop your fact-based legal analysis in the comments below. Thank you so much for staying till the very end of this deep dive. Please subscribe as we continue breaking down the verified facts of the nation's biggest trials.